So the next panel will be in English, and we're going to talk about platform economics. And of course, we're going to have a couple of statements. Jeroen, what statements will we have today?
We're going to have some interesting statements about the role of 5G in platform economics, and obviously we're going to talk about the power and the monopolistic behaviors of some of these platforms.
Interesting. Well,
And why is the session in English, by the way?
well, because of one of the guests doesn't speak Dutch, and platform economics is very international. So let me now first introduce to you our guests at the table. Okay, so here on the table we have four very distinguished gentlemen who know everything about platform economics, but all from a very different perspective. You already saw the brief introduction. This is the extensive introduction to our four guests here on the table. So here on my left, Groote. He holds a PhD in physics and has been manager at KPN for 30 years now, leading all sorts of innovative projects, and he's now the executive vice president 5G. We're going to talk about 5G and its effect on platform economics, of course. But first of all, how did you personally experience the crisis?
Yeah, crisis had two different phases for me. One of the stranger thing, but I think the other gentlemen experienced the same, was suddenly we had to work from home.
Yes.
No contacts with your colleagues anymore, etc. And surprisingly, that worked fine. But we're now getting into a phase of generating new ideas, new innovative ideas, etc. And then I think everybody thinks of that. We need interaction.
Yes, of course.
And interaction through a digital channel is interesting if you have to run a couple of operational processes, etc. But if you have to think something new, I think we don't have the tools, etc. So that makes me a little bit sad that we now have to go through the same set of experiences as the spring.
Well, that's why we're quite happy that we're now together physically to talk to each other. But another thing that struck me was that when we started working from home, everybody doing video conferences, you don't want any latency, you use a whole lot of bandwidth. Everything worked. That's not only a compliment to KPN, but the whole digital infrastructure. How did we manage?
Yeah. At the moment that we knew that this was going to happen, we started what we call a B-Alert Code Red team, which is the highest alert level that we have within KPN, because we thought we had the right capacity and it should be doable, but if something goes wrong, we need to act very proactively, very quick, etc., etc.
Yes.
And then came the first days, and what we started to realize is, the traffic is actually a little bit less than what's the traffic on Sunday. Because on Sunday, everybody is watching TV series, Netflix on 4K, stops a sport content because he has to open the door or something like that, etc. And then it becomes an individual stream again. So on Sunday, actually on the Sundays, the amount of traffic was much more than on a regular day with so many people working from home.
All right, so we flattened the
Very
curve slightly.
interesting.
Okay, so next to you, Daniel Gebler, the Chief Technology Officer of Picnic. Well, you know these little white cars fueled with electricity, bringing groceries at home. You're now the CTO for 5 years. It's the world's fastest growing online supermarket. Before that, you were the Director of Research and Development at Fredhopper. They make targeting software to optimize the shelves in online stores. You also hold a PhD, but then in computer science. How did you experience the crisis from a personal perspective as well as from Picnic?
We had, well, building up on the story that you shared, we had obviously very similar kind of experiences. In late February, early March, we saw a huge spike in demand. So basically everybody wanted to do online shopping, because nobody any longer felt safe in going to a physical supermarket. But the challenge in our context is, on the one hand, that demand spikes, while the actual supply and the capacity around the supply chain has been massively under pressure. So therefore, this is a kind of a two-sided sword. On the one hand, a lot of customers want to do it, and you need to keep a kind of capacity up and running. So for us, the challenges have been very similar to the hospitals. On the one hand, keeping everybody healthy and safe, but on the other hand, also building up a massively capacity. What we have seen is that a spike of demand of 2x, 3x, 5x, up to 15x on single days. And no business or no supply chain normally is organized that you have 15 times more demands than what you initially have planned.
But can you consider Picnic itself as a platform economic example?
We definitely have, so we have obviously a retail and logistic element, but there is certainly also significant platform elements. An example is, for instance, that the kind of suppliers and logistical suppliers, but also the products that we are listed in a way that we are building a platform, and customers or better suppliers can basically apply for or being delivered or through picking.
Yeah, but you're depending on the suppliers while the demand rises, but you succeeded in bringing them together on your platform.
Well, this is a kind of a two-sided market, so you need to always handle the kind of the differences between supply and demand, and it is a challenge. This is the same like with other platforms, Uber, Snap, whatever it is. But in our context, we could relatively well balance, because we have an intermediary, which we call a waiting list. So that means customers cannot immediately enter the picnic store, but they need to first go through a waiting list, and whenever we have enough capacity from the supply side, we can let them in the store. And that is basically the buffer that we have built to cope with the differences between supply and demand.
Okay. Most important question, did you run out of toilet paper?
The interesting thing is that toilet paper is, if you just look a bit to the volume of toilet paper, it is much, much bigger than a typical supermarket article. If you look to small packages of cheese or meat, etc., this is completely different to toilet paper. So therefore, our entire logistical and warehouse operation, we had to reorganize when everybody was ordering toilet paper. So we had a time where basically every second order had toilet paper. Normally only 1% of the orders have toilet papers. So there's a massive difference. We are not really running short, but what we see now, interestingly, is that now customers are under proportional ordering toilet paper because everybody has ordered it and they have enough now.
All the shelves are full.
Exactly.
The customers are becoming suppliers, and that's the great thing about platform economics,
that
right?
is giving back again from the customer side.
Yeah.
Real platforms actually would be built like that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sell it back and you make a profit. Done very well. Next to you, Christiaan van den Berg, innovation manager. He started at the Dutch Institute for Technology Research, TNO. And went to the Ministry of Justice and Security for, well, a huge series of innovation trajectories. His current job is called Developing the Science and Technology Function. And I first needed to ask you, what is that? Well, actually, you collaborate not only within the ministry, but with other ministries to develop the capacity to anticipate on technological developments, building capacity in knowledge sharing, also knowledge, demand, and supply. So actually, you're a sort of platform, aren't you?
Yeah, that's a great example. I'm trying to establish a sort of a network within government to deal with the fast technological change, and in a sense, that is an example of a platform. Yeah. And,
not for toilet paper, but for knowledge.
How about that?
Pretty cool. Okay, and how did you experience? Because when the governmental servants needed to work at home, they kind of set the standard. And the government said, well, maybe 1 September they can start working in the office again. And of course the ministries, they have huge offices, and then they said, well, stay at home. And actually the businesses followed suit. How are you coping currently with your work from home?
Well, it's been quite an experience because, to be frank, infrastructure in terms of video conferencing, all that stuff, and file sharing, all that stuff, that was a bit outdated in the context of government. Due to Corona, we had to step that up. So we've been leapfrogging towards the 21st century, and now it was incredible. In a few weeks' time, we had most of it arranged, and everybody got used to these new media, and everybody just transformed into a modern way of working. And it was fascinating to see. Of course, we had to reinvent things like a simple meeting or a workshop or a creative setting. We had to try out all these tools that are there. And it's been a fantastic learning experience. And I think we've become quite good at it. Of course, we miss the social aspect. Yep. And what's very important within ministries is the internal politics. And for internal politics, you need the grapevine, you need the coffee machine, you need to hear the things that you wouldn't hear in a normal setting, but you just outside the meetings.
But is it a bad thing we're losing that? Or?
I think it will hamper. I think it will seriously hamper effectiveness in the long run.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Because you
Informal
you
contact.
you get squeezed into your first priorities, your assignments, and there's less room for things like serendipity or something.
Yes, okay. I think we experienced that all. But let me finish the introductory round, because at my right side, Martijn Arets is a kind of platformologist, I could say, because for the last 7 years he held a crowd expedition. So he visited 16 countries around the world and talked to 500 entrepreneurs, experts and researchers on platform revolution. And he wrote a book about it, Platform Economy. And he is an entrepreneur with a background in leisure management, marketing and communication. His previous project kind of worked similarly. He called it Brand Expedition, a journey visiting Europe's most interesting brands. And he also wrote a book about that. And his aim is to link stakeholders in the debate while currently traveling a bit less, I guess, because how did the crisis affect your work? Because you're kind of traveling researcher, and you know need to do it through screen. Or?
Yes, it's completely different now. So the planning was at the end of October I would go to Stockholm, because I'm also there working together with some partners. But yeah, that was also cancelled. So the travel part is now mostly online, which makes this really effective. But yeah, what you also said, you really miss the serendipity moments, because in the end, life is more than only practical conversations. So that's something that you miss a lot. But yeah, that's how it is. So you make the best out of it. So I have a professional studio in my office where I can do professional meetings online with people over the world. So it has some good sides, because you become much more practical than used to be. So when somebody calls me, it's okay, Martijn, can we meet? Normally it was okay, see you in 2 months. Now is it okay, see you in 5 minutes? So that's a really big benefit. But yeah, so it's got its pros and cons.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of the expert on platforms. If we need to find a working definition, we already mentioned Picnic, but we also have Airbnb, Zalando, Uber. What consists a platform?
Yeah, the hard thing about definitions is a definition is the result of the decisions you make, what you put in and what not. So that's why I don't think definitions are this special, because it's all a effect of the decisions you make. I think if you look at platforms, one thing that's really clear is that it's a two-sided or multi-sided marketplace. So there are always more sided
more suppliers, more demand, and you only bring them together on an electronic platform.
Yeah, not only, but and in the end, it really unites a really fragmented supply and a fragmented demand, because platforms, they reduce information asymmetry, and it only works when both sides of the marketplaces are fragmented, because else there's no information asymmetry.
Yes, okay. Later on we'll discuss the good side and the bad side of platform economy. But first we'll be having a statement, and well, let's together introduce this statement, because it's called "The next generation mobile networks, 5G, only accelerate existing processes within platform economies," and people can vote on that. But before we go to that, Jacob, 5G, it's not only just speeding up, it's not only more bandwidth, but 5G is more than that, right?
Absolutely. 5G is a lot more than just only the speed. And how I normally explain it to people is I'm always using a triangle for that. And the speed is only the top part of the triangle. It gives you maybe 10-fold, 100-fold more capacity. And capacity could be speed, 1 gigabit, 10 gigabit per second to your mobile phone. I have to think about the applications for that, but at least it's there. But think also about capacity. The lower parts of the triangle consist of 2 different elements. One is what we call massive machine type communication. It's the amount of sensors that you can put in place on a square kilometer. That's now growing to 1 million sensors per square kilometer. That seems a lot, but if we're going to count how many sensors people already have, watch, phone, maybe step counter, maybe some medical equipment, etc. And here in this environment, we're already counting up a lot of sensors. Yeah, and when we add light to that, etc. So 1 million is absolutely necessary, also to, I think, to support Picnic in the work they have to do. Yeah. But then for me, the most important point comes, which is the low latency and the reliability part of it. which means that we can now dedicate certain parts, certain capacity of the network to a specific user. Maybe to the Ministry to have very secure and reliable operations, etc. And I think that's always extremely important for a platform, that it needs the connectivity on both sides, on the supplier side and on the demand side. And if on the demand side people rely on that platform, then it also needs to be very, very reliable on the supplier side. And that's what we can bring with 5G.
Okay, we'll talk later on that. But first go to the audience, what they think. Jeroen is already standing there with the next statement. Over to Jeroen.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So, like the previous session, we have asked the audience back home to respond to this specific statement. And actually, the statement is a bit compelling, I feel. I think the percentages are also changing while we progress on the conversation, or while the conversation progresses. And the statement is actually about, is 5G as disruptive and as innovative as some companies claim it is? Because the statement is the next generation mobile networks only accelerate existing processes within platform economies. And there's a lot of disagreement with that. Currently we're at 80%. So it sounds like the audience agrees to the fact that this is disruptive and very important for the times to come.
Good to know.
Okay, so the audience agrees with 80%, agrees with the statement, right? That it only
Disagrees.
Oh, disagrees. Okay, yeah. So that
Disagrees,
you
so
do
it's
think
more
it's disruptive, because Jacob, you already mentioned picnic. You can use a lot of more sensor technology. Well, does it really change your business, or does it just speed it up?
If it changes the business, we will see, but it certainly accelerates quite a bit of processes. So we have started earlier this year a very important project for us, where we are completely robotizing and automating our fulfillment operation. Mm-hmm. And that means you have a warehouse, which is then typically 20,000-30,000 square meters, a lot of robots running around, and that need to be controlled, that need to be autonomously make decisions, but need to have also in a combined way do planning and control, and that is only possible with low latency infrastructure. So for us, capacity and bandwidth is maybe one element, but the low latency is probably the most important one. The other element is we have now more than 1,000 cars on the streets in Germany and Netherlands, and if you want to really go to a kind of real-time control of the cars, if you want to think about autonomous driving, etc., then it's only possible with technologies like 5G. Yeah. So we see this is really a step change technology-wise compared to what we have now with 4G and different kind of technologies. Yes.
Okay, so Christiaan, please disagree with the audience that it just only speeds up, doesn't really change it, or do you agree?
Actually, I'm not sure, because of course these facets I understand and I agree with, but also I was wondering, might it also work in a way that through 5G, maybe local suppliers might have a chance to compete in another way, without platforms, with regional clients. I can't really see the business model yet, but that's the interesting thing about with these new technologies. The challenge is exactly that, to foresee application and effects. And I think 5G is a great example. We don't yet know. KPN has a great sales pitch of the new technology, but even you guys have probably some ideas, but though in 10 years' time you also look to the new reality, and
but this is, in practical terms, is the same kind of debate that we had in the 80s and 90s about GPS. So GPS is developed in the 60s for military purpose. Nobody could have thought about that at some point we will have an Uber or any other form of location intelligence type of applications. And we will see something very, very similar with 5G and whatever.
That's what I mean.
And the Christiaan is adding something very interesting, that it might disrupt the business of platform economics, but it might disrupt the bigger platforms like Uber, Airbnb, giving space to smaller platforms.
Just a wild guess, but we wouldn't know. We couldn't know.
Yeah. Martijn, would you agree or disagree?
I think it depends, because in the end, innovation is not only about technology. It's also about strategy, business models, and also the adoption of people. Because in the end, so like 10 years ago, when you ask a tech guy, when will we have autonomous cars, he or she will say, okay, in 2 years. And when you would ask a policymaker, he or she will say 40 years. So in the end, what you see is that that something maybe is possible from a technology perspective doesn't mean anything if people also will adapt. But I think it's really interesting what you say, because in the end, technology is also, and new developments are also lowering transaction costs, which make it possible for also smaller stakeholders also to be part of the game. And it's also what you see, like, because in the end, also many business models, also like Uber. Uber may be a really big company, but in the end, maybe there are 1,000 Uber taxis in Amsterdam, but here in Haarlem or at my home in Houten, I have nothing. I have no access to these 1,000 cars. So there I see that Uber has a really hyper-local network effect. So the benefits of scale for such an app is the benefit of scale of spreading the investments over many transactions. But when the cost of a transaction will be lower, there's also a possibility for other smaller parties also to interact.
So actually now we stumble to the next topic of discussion. Is platform economics leading to monopolization? Will it lead to, let's say, there's one Uber for the whole world, all the taxis, there's one Airbnb for all the homes, or does it leave room for smaller parties to step in or not? Would you agree or disagree?
I think with all the technology means that come available, that there is room enough for other people to add something to that platform.
Yeah, but I'm absolutely not economy of scale, right? That's a real bummer.
Yeah, but what we learned out of the field labs that we set up on 5G, because we weren't quite sure what was going to happen, and there was one thing that I wanted to avoid: only pushing technology. It's really about the adoption, etc. What can you do with it? Can you really make a disruption to agriculture, for instance? Can you help that farmer to get his stuff directly into the picnic supply chain, instead of that all kinds of intermediate parties get in there? Now, and with the fact that that's going to happen, I think all kinds of local new initiatives, etc., they always will appear, and they will have an effect on these huge platforms, etc. So I don't think that that we will end up with only one platform for taxi, one platform for cloud, etc. Okay. They will be different.
So even though there's economy of scale, there will be room for
But the argument about economics of scale is that there is a scale effect for a specific way of doing your business. So for instance, until around 2010, there has been a scalable way of running a taxi business in New York. But then there was a step change done with location intelligence and everything what Uber brought to the market there, where a new process or new way of doing the taxi business brought in the market. And then basically doing taxi was done in a new way, a new platform way possible. While the old way, you could also consider a type of a platform, not according to today's definition, but basically at this point in time. And what we will see is that the next level of innovation and disruption will simply bring a new way of business process, which none of the old platforms can do initially at scale. And that is the innovation opportunity that basically all new businesses have.
So can you sketch a sort of cycle that these platforms, they grow rapidly because they have a very successive way of bringing supply and demand together. But as they become large, they become traditional. They implement all sorts of rituals to keep their business going, up until the point another platform takes over with a much more innovative model, and it goes down. And the same like Facebook is now going down while Instagram is growing.
Facebook is an excellent example. So if you reach the size of Facebook, you can, in many cases, only innovate by acquisition. Or by copying. And that is something, this is basically the story of Instagram, this is all the stuff that they take over from Tek ToK, etc. And that is basically the stage where you see new models or new ways of doing social networking is basically opening up. So the kind of the entire TikTok story and also a little bit of Snap story is just because the kind of the models of doing social interactions online was no longer possible on a platform like Facebook, and the next innovation step was done by simply another platform.
Yeah, but that might plea for more monopolies. I mean, ever since IT companies came about, even before the Second World War, IBM was just buying their competitors. If they were more innovative, they just buy them and to keep the market to themselves. So is that the danger of platforms that as soon as a small competitor comes which is more innovative, they just buy them to remain the biggest?
I think in the end, yes, of course, but there's also more stakeholders in the field, like policymakers. also governments that say, okay, how can we secure public values in a digital world?
Yeah.
This is also why you also see many discussions on competition law, from the EU, the Platform to Business Directive, where a platform needs to be really clear to the professional supplier, okay, based on which variables am I going to list you in a platform. So it's not only a technology development, it's also a development where also the society, then represented by policymakers, if everything works right in a democracy, also take into account the public values.
Well, we do have a government official sitting next to you. You're not the government official who talks about legislation and stuff, but can you share a little bit from your point of view?
Sure, I'll share a little, but just from my personal point of view, I'm not representing any government whatsoever. But as far as I'm not sure whether monopolies, whether these large platforms, whether they will naturally be followed by new ones. I hope so. But on the other hand, they have a tendency, in my opinion, to grow into monopolies by also using private technologies within the platform, making sure that no others copy that. And then with the growing market share, they more and more try to keep others out. I mean, there's natural tendencies. So we see also quite a few examples where these monopolies take a long time, exist a long time, some 10 years, some 15 years, and during that time they basically have so much power. In some cases they have so much money, more than a normal nation even has. In that sense, a combination of monopolies with this kind of money and this kind of lobbying power, in my opinion, is something we should really take a hard look on, and we should think of whether we want that.
I think that's the most important question on the table here. So let's ask the audience what they think of it, because the platforms are becoming more powerful. So the next statement is, platform owners have a lot of data, influence and power over users. Governments need to balance this. Over to Jeroen.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and audience at the table. So, as always with these platform things, you will always get up to regulate. It should be regulated. The moment someone gets popular, it should be regulated. And when I was watching television last week, I felt that most of those social influencers should also be more regulated, that the government needs to take a stab at this. So let us see what the audience thinks. It's you could say that we have quite a socialistic audience back home. At the moment, it's showing that 100% is agreeing to the fact that government should take a stand at those big platforms. Let me see whether this will change. I guess so. There has to be more balance. I definitely hope, because over 100 years. We have seen that all those monopolist companies always disappear and will always be disrupted. Yeah. I'm making a political statement here. We're reducing, but it's still 95% agrees that to the gentleman at the table that government should step in and regulate those big mean platforms.
Well, thank you very much, audience, for joining the discussion. I wouldn't say like Jeroen just did that's a socialist statement. It's rather that we need a perfect market. Platforms, they could bring demand and supply together in a perfect way. But if there's no competition, you don't have a free market. So governments, according to you, need to balance this game. Who of you would disagree, saying, well, no, governments don't need to interfere because everything is going quite well? You all agree with the statement that governments need to do something.
Let's challenge, because I think it's really important that the government steps in and takes its responsibility. But the problem is when you only say government needs to fix this, then people will wait till government fix it. Exactly. And I think, look, we're talking a lot about platform power, but platform power is only power by the grace of its users. Because a platform with no users is worthless. So this is also why I talk a lot with trade unions and organizations that represent different sectors, because at the moment that you also unite a group of stakeholders in a platform, let's say the suppliers, you can also have a much more equal power balancing field. So like in the US, there are some experiments with platform cooperatives, where the taxi drivers are investing themselves in technology, and they are also owning and governing the platform themselves. There's now a court case where in the UK, some Uber drivers say, okay, we started a group of drivers, also in a cooperative. Every individual driver is going to file its GDPR requests. We're going to bundle this data and then reverse engineer the algorithm of Uber to use it as evidence in a court case against Uber.
So are we now getting a sort of platform labor unions?
Yeah.
So the suppliers are organizing themselves like a labor union?
Yeah, but also like Work in Nederland or other institutions. They are now really complaining about, so they're really playing, we are negatively affected by these platforms without taking responsibility themselves to see, how can we also have the benefit of skill of our community and build our own platform, or maybe build a cooperative where everybody comes together. And of course, you get also then some competition law issues, of course. But there are different ways to have a better balance in power, only by government.
Well, that will be a perfect world, but then again,
possible.
The platform is international, and the suppliers, they stuck in a country. So how can you create a sort of supplier labor union across the world?
It depends per platform, of course, and per sector. Like taxi, like food delivery, like restaurants, hotels. It's really good to and really possible also in one country to create a counterforce by organizing this.
But what you see in the discussion is, I think we have a shared understanding that there is a problem that we need to solve. I think there's a disagreement about how do you want to solve it. Exactly. And I think there are conceptually two problems that you need to tackle. On the one hand, those kind of platforms are creating a problem for the participants on the platform. And this is a kind of distribution of power and monopolization of power, etc. But there are also negative externalities. Exactly. So even if you don't participate at all in any side of the market on this platform, you are negatively affected. So a good thing is all the discussion about Airbnb and what does it mean for the housing prices. I think these are kind of two topics that you need to certainly separate. Yeah. And then the point is also the solution doesn't need to be actually that you apply additional rules on a single platform, but maybe in the same way as monopolies, you are striving for having more players in the same type of market, that you need to make sure that you have more platforms for the same type of service. Yes. If you have two platforms in the cities where Uber and Lyft are competing against each other, you have as a taxi driver a very, very different dynamics than in a city where you have only Uber or only Lyft. And that is something what I think everybody who is conceptually working on a solution to this problem should think very carefully about.
Yes. Yeah, but could you make this distinction? Some externalities like the housing problem with Airbnb, that's where governments are now stepping in. But to continue on the issue of the suppliers, sort of labor union of suppliers. Does that work with Picnic too? The people who work with you, do they also organize themselves in order to create one voice to the platform Picnic? Or?
This is... For us, we have actually a platform where we, on our side, we have a specific size, we are representing a kind of a specific size of business, and then our suppliers, which are the kind of the Unilevers and Nestle of the world, are also on the other side relative big players. So therefore, you don't have this kind of discrepancy between power. The big problem you have is if you have kind of taxi drivers, taxi riders, and then you have a kind of a monopoly or kind of an organizing power in between, which is basically very strong towards both players in the market.
Yes. So actually they need to build a platform of their own, right?
Yeah, but that's the interesting thing of this time. I experienced that myself, and we all do, how easy it is in these times to organize oneself. With your neighborhood, with equally minded people over the world, all these platforms, all these communication platforms are there for us all. So we can organize indeed ourselves more easily. So I like your idea. Not only look at the government that has a hard time organizing itself around these new challenges, both at the national and at the European and even international level. But we shouldn't only look to the government, indeed.
And I think we shouldn't only look at getting it organized, but with the organization also ideas come and innovation comes, etc. And I think we need to trust the history a little bit. We had big monopolies with the church in the Middle Ages, etc. They disappeared. Maybe not a political statement, but
took also
but
2,000 years, eh?
yeah, that's right. But probably it goes a little bit faster now with that, and especially if we organize it in such a way that people with the same ideas also come up with a new innovative idea.
Yes.
Because I think local against global is also something which will shift. The balance will be shifting back to some local experiments, and Picnic will suffer or like it. They can do something with it.
We are already in the middle of it. So what we see is that we are listing a lot of local products, and that is actually a distinguishing factor compared to, let's say, the other players in the online food space. And we see this is becoming even stronger from a consumer angle, kind of a distinguishing factor.
Yeah, to throw in another example, Netflix is well, not against Hollywood, but they're stimulating local production, both culturally but also technologically, because if people watch their local series, they can push the buffers just to the local servers. You don't need a global reach, and that's for KPN probably interesting, that data is being spread around more on local places, right?
Yeah, but there are a lot of other possibilities also to already forecast what kind of series, what kind of data is needed in what neighborhood, etc., etc. And we're constantly looking at that with content distribution networks. What's the data that we should store locally to have quick responses, and what's the data which is once in a while asked for and should be stored globally.
And then we come to another dimension of the platform economics. It makes everything much more transparent, right? Because on the platform you can see supply, demands, you can see trade real time on any little transaction. Does that make the economy much more efficient?
I wouldn't say transparent, because I think transparent
for the platform
is
itself,
an
but
illusion.
not for the users.
No, but
okay.
what she in platform dynamics, a platform brings together a fragmented supply and demands. But so for the platform, they get all the data. But in the end, for the transaction, they only give some of the data to its users, also for the benefit of the transaction, but also in the benefit of the business model. It's like with Uber. Exactly. If you order an Uber, you can call the driver, but when the gig is finished, he will have another phone number. So platform. So and I don't think you need to underestimate that. In the end, the power of in many markets information asymmetry is one of the biggest driver of markets, also in platform economics. I think in the end that maybe platforms will even increase information asymmetry for its users, then it will decrease.
So that's the dark side. But we do have a question from the audience. We only have 5 minutes left, so Jeroen, throw in a question.
Yeah, actually, I think it's a question. It's a nice question to ask to the last speaker. Is about those platform owners. In what way do they feel threatened about the fact that they might be regulated? And if you talk about those platforms, who are they?
Yes. Okay, so I guess you mentioned Martijn. You talk to a lot of platform owners. Are they afraid of governments? And perhaps you should specify national governments, European governments, or
no. I think
no.
It's no,
they're not afraid.
It really depends per type of platform, and we're not talking about Uber and whatever. But there are only on the Dutch market there are maybe at least 1,000 platforms active. So we only talk about the more accesses in a market. But like what you see happening with Uber, like in California, there's a new bill. It's called the AB5, which should force them to hire their drivers. So they thought about another bill, the Prop 22, and they already spent $180 million, and that's no secret. That's just public information in lobbying for their legislation. I think many platforms where really the core platform really is threatened by existing regulations, yes, they are really afraid. But I think in general, most platforms don't really have problems with that, because in the end, unclear regulation is also a threat for your business model in the future. So I see also many platforms that really want to have clear legislation, because with unclear legislation, maybe it's also hard for them to get new investors.
Yes.
So
It's a continuous battle. We've been talking about many topics now, the technological side, the market side, the regulation side of platform economics. I think it's safe to say that they're here to stay. But if we will be here next year talking again about platform economics, what might have changed in the meanwhile, thinking about the crisis? Let me do the final round. So Jacob, if you sit in next year, well, what might have changed in the platform economy if we talk then?
I think we will see even more platforms in certain niche elements of the market, even in the Netherlands, but probably also in worldwide, where that asymmetry in information, but also in demand and supply, is localized in a certain area, and people are going to make use of that. So growth.
I think it's a pretty clear trend that I will just build up on. I would even go a step further. You will see that this kind of general purpose platforms will become less relevant when you will see the more differentiated, more tailored platforms will gain more relevancy. And then the bigger platforms will try to find mechanisms to capture this kind of more specialized platform demand. But my expectation, my hunch would be that we see a more distributed approach towards the general platform economics. You see this now already in the space of video streaming. We had a couple of years back just Netflix, and now we have already easily 10 competing services, and we will have many more for the respective verticals. There's a Disney and there's an Amazon, etc.
We'll be having a platform of platforms. Christiaan.
Yeah, let's hope that, and then I'm striving at a better understanding at government side, both at the local and international level, better capacity to deal with it, form its vision, know what its place is, and what government should do.
And you are building that capacity, so it's a
on
good
that.
thing on your own platform. And finally, you're a platformologist.
I think 1 year, my first answer would be there hasn't been changed a lot, because 1 year is really short, or because we're talking really about speed, but in the end, also the big platforms are there already for 10, 20 years. So the speed is also in a different context. But I think the discussion, if you look in 1 year, I think the discussion now is really on the to-consumer platforms. But I really see that the innovation is in the to-business platforms. So I really predict that in 1 year, there will be lots of innovation into business, and then we still have discussions on to-consumer.
We'll all be freelancers on one platform. That will be grand, well, especially for you and me. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us with this panel on platform economics. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.